out, and I think you all will agree with that, whether it's the military or the police, the threats that we face today are so complex. And what we ask of those who put themselves in harm's way is so challenging that gone are the days where it's just drop and give me 20. Gone are the days where whether it's soldiers or police officers are told, it's an order, so follow it, and I will expect you to think for the rest of the day. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gigi. You know, what we have to do today, whether it's in the military or the police, is get real buy-in. Because when you ask somebody to, every single day, put their life on the line so that we don't have to worry about our own safety, you got to make sure that they are bought into what the plan is, what the strategy is, and you have to make sure that they are so bought in that they're ready to take risks, to be free-thinking, to potentially think creatively. So when I was in the military, that's exactly how I was taught to lead soldiers in combat. That's exactly how my superiors led me as well. And I think that those lessons translate in Congress, where you are one of 435 independent contractors. Everybody's seeking to represent their district, and you can't get anything done without building coalitions and without getting that same buy-in that I know that before roll call at a precinct or before you step out on a mission in Afghanistan, Iraq, or anywhere else, you're getting that same buy-in. You're asking people, well, what do you think? What's the best way we should do this? And you're making sure everyone is adding their input. Congress is no different if we do it the right way. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. Because what we find in DC today is they're not doing things that way. Everybody cares about Twitter, about Facebook, about their special interests, and actually, most importantly, about the next election. Today we have over 20 Democrats running for president in March of the off year. And the dangerous thing with that is, democracy's great. But the dangerous thing there is that potentially the president could wake up tomorrow and say, I want to get something done, folks. Everybody's been running on infrastructure. I want to get infrastructure done. Well, unfortunately, members of the Democratic Party could potentially say, well, I'm worried about the next election. I don't want you, Mr. President, to get a win. After Barack Obama became president, Mitch McConnell stood up. And he said, our singular legislative agenda or priority as Republicans in the Senate is to ensure that Barack Obama is a one-term president. This was the day after he got sworn in. We cannot, as a country, afford to go from campaign to campaign to campaign. We'll never survive. That's not the country that our soldiers risk their lives for. That's not the country that our police officers risk their lives for. We're better than that. And that's why I'm in D.C. That's why I think you all sent me to D.C., is to think about your concerns, not the next election, and certainly not the interests of lobbyists or corporate PACs. So thank you for the question, Scott.
Okay, so, and you mentioned Congress and you mentioned party lines, and I gotta be honest, and I know I speak for, I'm not gonna say the entire Jewish community, I'm gonna say the entire community in Staten Island, where the ugly head of racism and anti-Semitism has now shown a light in Congress and the Democratic Party, the party that you belong to. We have, I've never seen the left are not liberal and gracious to the Jewish people. They are anti-Semitic, not all of them, obviously, but a few Omar, and I'm not going to name all the names, you know the names. And recently, you stood up after an anti-Semitic remark, and you made a statement against this terrible statement. So much so that Nancy Pelosi followed suit eventually. And I give you credit for that. You stood up. But after that day, and after a half-hearted apology, the remarks are still there, the actions are still there, it's there. And she's still on the committee, and she is still wielding influence like I've never seen before in this country. And I don't want to say it's the 1930s again, but it took one little person in the 30s to change a world. And I don't think I'm over-exaggerating. I don't think that the people here think I'm over-exaggerating. This is an issue, and we're looking towards you as our representative, number one, as a newly elected Jewish congressman. That's a heavy crown to wear. That's number two. And as a Staten Islander who thinks that we don't have the right to pray, but we have to pray to, and to do, what are we going to do about this?
I know that this is really on your minds, and it's on mine too. And as your congressman, I gotta tell you, I'm sorry. From the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry. You can tell me, Max, you didn't say anything? Why are you sorry? You sent me to Congress to take responsibility. You sent me to Congress to have your back. You sent me to Congress to protect you against hate and divisiveness and vitriol and pain, and I failed you. Because I know that Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's comments really caused you all a lot of pain. Bringing up anti-Semitic tropes like it's all about the Benjamins, and claiming that you all have dual allegiance, or that potentially someone could have dual allegiance. I don't think she claimed you all have dual allegiance. But certainly as a Jewish combat veteran, I can tell you I don't have dual allegiance. I have allegiance to the flag. I have allegiance to the United States of America. Now, I was the first person in the Democratic Party to come out and criticize it. I gotta tell you, that's easy. That's easy. And it shouldn't have been difficult for other people to do the same. But now what we have to do, and this is where the hard work comes in, is not go on Twitter and Facebook and worry about how I'm going to pound my chest publicly, but is do the hard work, have the hard discussions behind the scenes to make sure that these comments do not continue at the same frequency. And perhaps most important, to make sure that more people are not saying them. You can have a small group of people saying things like this, but we have to make sure that it's not more and more and more. And believe you me, I would rise up and put my foot down to say instances of racism and Islamophobia as well, but I believe that Jewish people are deserving of that same treatment. Don't you all? Don't you all? Now, this is a free country. I watched people, I really do love get hurt defending our Constitution, defending the right to free speech. And so my point to those in Congress who want to criticize Israel is like, you have the right to criticize Israel and to criticize the Prime Minister, but you have to do it respectfully. You have to do it without making anti-Semitic comments, because all that does is cause people pain. That's all that does. You can count on me that I'm going to continue to fight for you. Now, there are things that can happen down the road, Scott. You named one, taking someone off of a committee. That's an incredibly serious step. Incredibly serious. And I'm aware, every member of Congress knows that there are consequences, potential consequences for their actions. But we have to remain incredibly vigilant that these comments like these do not spread, that they don't become socially acceptable, that we don't see more and more members of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Because I'm not going to let the Republican Party off that easy, Scott.
And nor should you, but we don't hear that.
Well, yes, you certainly do. You certainly do when you have the minority leader of the Republican Party standing up and talking about people like George Soros and Janet Yellen pulling the strings. You do, you certainly do. You certainly do. This is not something that one party has a monopoly on, but that's not the point. I'll call out either party. The point here is that we as a people, we as a community, have to be vigilant. You all remember the time when Israel was the underdog, right? You all remember the time when everybody was aware that Israel was existing in a tough neighborhood, that it had had war declared upon it for every single decade of its existence. Well, we have to remain vigilant, and that we cannot rest on our laurels as a community, and also when it comes to U.S.-Israel relations. We have to constantly be talking about the fact that Israel's situation is precarious, We have to constantly be talking about the fact that America's own national security is incredibly reliant on Israel. We have to constantly be talking about the fact that Israel itself is a political and economic miracle, one that we must support. Because there's one thing that I can guarantee you, really, potentially one thing only, other than death and taxes. And that's, that over the course of the next 50 years, I promise you, the Democratic Party will at one point hold the keys to the castle. At one point in the next 50 years, the Democrats will control the House, the Senate, and the White House. I can also promise you sometime in the next 50 years, the Republican Party is going to have that same power. We have to return back to the days where we were confident that whoever was in charge, the U.S.-Israel relationship would remain strong and the Jewish people would be protected from anti-Semitism. And I promise you that so long as I am alive and so long as I'm your congressman, I'm going to work my heart out to make sure that's the case.
How do we control what's happening today? I'm not talking about in Israel, I'm talking about in our Congress right now. The hate is there, it shows, no one's afraid of saying it. Pulling the strings is not the same thing as saying the Benjamins,
No, Scott. There's two different... I am not right now going to be because you and I could debate this all day long. Which comment is worse here and there? It is a verifiable fact that we've seen Republicans and Democrats make anti-Semitic comments. That's not an excuse. That's not me saying that it's okay. What I am trying to tell you, though, is as I talk about vigilance, which is a theme that I'm going to constantly be referring back to, we've got to step outside of our party allegiance when we have to just be able to call out what's wrong. Now, you could say, well, what are the punishments, right? I think that's what you're trying to get to because you're a businessman and you want things to be linear. I get that. I love you for that.
I'm a linear guy.
I love you
I'm
for
also
that.
trying to get that the apology was half-hearted 3 weeks ago, a month ago. It's still happening today. How are we slacking it down today?
Look, if you think for a second that I'm satisfied with what I've seen thus far, I'm not.
That's what we want to hear.
Of course I'm not.
There you go.
Of course I'm not. To equate Jewish organizations with the NRA, of course I'm not upset. Of course I'm not satisfied. And I don't know that you are either. And I want to, that's why the first thing that I said is I'm sorry. I'm sorry because I couldn't protect you from this. Now that takes a lot to say. That takes a lot to
I
say.
know very few people that will get on the stage and say I'm sorry, so it takes a lot to say.
But this is, and the first question you asked was in reference to how complicated and multidimensional this game is now. Politics. She and so many others, or every other member of Congress, has been elected by their own people. And so what we have to do, if you want a strategy going forward, and I think this is actually a strategy for all of us as we consider this, is we cannot afford just to be reactive as a community. We have to be vigilant and on the offensive when it comes to talking about the importance of Israel in the world, talking about how precarious its situation is. We can't just afford to sit back and wait until the next comment to respond to it. That's the strategy going forward, is positive and frequent discussions about all these issues that we just spoke about. Is that a silver bullet? Of course not. I would never lie to you about that. But will it significantly help? Yes, of course. Of course it will. The Jewish community cannot afford to just rest on its laurels.
And I agree, and I thank you for that answer, and I thank you for coming out and clarifying it. You know, I know everyone, not everyone's involved in Facebook, but there's a Facebook post last week. A woman in Crown Heights is walking with a carriage, sidewalk, and someone comes in front of her, and instead of going around this woman, kicks the carriage, and the carriage knocks on the side. Anti-Semitism is not just hitting in our Congress, it's not just hitting in our state, it's not just hitting in our city, it's hitting in our streets and our boroughs. We spoke, Chief Corr and I speak at security meetings. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, it's on the rise, it's on the rise. Outside of Congress, and what your powers are in Congress, what could you help us with on the local level to fight this?
100%. So, first of all, this is scary stuff, isn't it? to watch on TV in neighborhoods that you all have walked the streets of, to feel as if you're no longer potentially welcome. Or you have to look over your shoulder, or you have to tell your son, I don't know if I feel comfortable with you wearing a yarmulke. Many of you I know are thinking those thoughts now, and they're perfectly justified. And I am thankful that we have the best police department in the world to protect us against this issue. Now, I'm the subcommittee chairman of intelligence and counterterrorism. Not only have we seen hate crimes skyrocket in urban America throughout the country, but we've seen extreme far-right organizations increase as well. Ones that are racist, ones that are anti-Semitic, ones that are Islamophobic. It is the responsibility of the Department of Homeland Security to track these organizations and to treat incidents where we see mass shootings from far-right organizations as the acts of terrorism that they are. The acts of terrorism that they are. This also applies to school shootings. We don't have enough security at our schools. The police are getting stretched thin. Stretched thin. Shakur, you can speak to that probably more than anybody. When you think about acts of hate, there's more targets than you could ever protect at one point, at one time. You would have to quadruple the police force. So we also have to consider intelligence sharing. The NYPD has an unbelievable relationship with the federal government, with the FBI. The NYPD, people don't often realize this, has people stationed in 11 countries. 11 countries gathering intelligence. And I pledge to you, as the first New York City member who's the subcommittee chairman of intelligence and counterterrorism in the history of Congress, that I am going to fight tooth and nail to make sure that the NYPD is adequately funded and adequately resourced, because it's deserving of that. It's deserving of that. It is a champion of me in the halls of Congress. There's a champion. But lastly, as a member of Congress, I also have network power to make sure that I can convene people, federal agencies, local agencies around the table so we can solve a problem. We have an island here. I don't mean to make a very obvious statement, but on an island we have unbelievable abilities to coordinate. And I want to play a role in that, and I think we already have. We can do it with the opioid epidemic, and we certainly have to do it with rising incidents of anti-Semitism and hate crimes. The DA's office, the NYPD, community-based organizations, these in particular, Cojo and JCC. We can solve this together. You all are deserving of that.
Thank you. Rising costs and the transportation problems and things like that.
So first of all, because your question hits the nail on the head.
I'm linear, baby.
I can't compliment you enough, Scott. For a long, long time now, multiple generations, Staten Islanders have been ignored and ripped off. Plain and simple. Unions go down, real wages stagnate, you see your healthcare costs going up, you see your taxes going up. Staten Islanders today living in so many neighborhoods pay a higher tax than the mayor does on his home, even though the mayor's home is worth 3-4 times as much. And on top of that, we now have the end of the SALT exemption. Can you believe that? The federal government turned around and raised our taxes. So I'm fighting with every ounce I have, with Republicans, guys like Pete King, and Democrats as well, in Congress as well as in the Senate, to make sure that we get that SALT exemption back. So when it comes to transportation, we have got to have incredible investments in our transportation options. For some people who are committed to being drivers, we got to see some roads expanded. So I've partnered with Assemblyman Cusick to make sure that we finish that last study on expanding the Staten Island Expressway. Once that study's done, and we're looking to get it funded at the state level, that will make it ready for me to fight for federal funding. Now, we also have to look at expanding our ferry services as well. To Iran, and put a lot of money behind promoting the fact that we need more ferry services.
after we win the election, what do you say? What do you know? The mayor announces that we are finally going to get included in the citywide ferry system. So we're going to get a ferry from the North Shore to Midtown. But we have to improve the Staten Island train system as well. It takes too long to get from the South Shore to the North Shore. That should be a bullet train. That should be the fastest train in New York City. But we need to actually see infrastructure investments. We need far more buses here in Staten Island. Express buses and local buses, because as often as we focus on the commuting nightmare, we also have to focus on the nightmare of getting from one part of Staten Island to the other. We need ultimately to provide people with all of the options available so that if they want to drive, they can drive. But a lot of people would rather take public transportation. It just has to be accessible. But all too often what we're seeing is that Staten Island keeps on getting forgotten. I guarantee you if this commuting nightmare, if this tax nightmare existed in Brooklyn or the Bronx or Queens, the mayor or the governor or the senators, they would have already solved it. Well, I assure you that I'm going to continue fighting. And I'm going to continue using exactly this language about the ways that we've been ignored and ripped off until they actually show us the respect and the resource allocations that we're deserving of, because I know how much you love your home. I know how much you don't want to move. But there's a breaking point. I get it. Life gets too difficult, the commute gets too long, the taxes get too high, and suddenly Jersey doesn't look that bad. I want to keep you here, all right? And I know that everybody else who's working for you does as well.
That's wonderful, Congressman. Thank you. We brought home the south wall.
Yeah, we're building a wall.
Building a wall, but a different kind of wall. What does that mean to us? That we're spending billions and millions of dollars on a wall by sea? Explain to us.
So, after Superstorm Sandy, it was determined that we need real resiliency projects here on Staten Island. And after a lot of hard work, the model that was determined was that we need a seawall on the east shore of Staten Island. And I'm proud to say that my first piece of legislation, which was just signed by the President of the United States, will eliminate the last piece of red tape to allow for this seawall to finally get built. You know, I also want to, please. I also want to take a moment though to acknowledge my predecessor as well. Congressman Dan Donovan, a Republican, I'm a Democrat, but he worked his heart out as well to get us to that point, and we took this over the finish line. And that's important. But we're not stopping there, because now that we have the allocation, and no more bureaucratic obstruction for building this seawall, now they're going to be taking 1 million pounds of stone into the east shore of Staten Island. We have to do everything possible to make sure that that doesn't obstruct our traffic even more, that that doesn't obstruct our quality of life even more. I'm not just going to get a piece of legislation signed and say, my job is done. Me and the borough president and everyone else here on Staten Island is going to work as hard as we can to make sure that everyone who lives in those communities, their lives aren't unnecessarily disrupted. Because people have been living with such stress. Every day they look out into the water and destroyed their lives, the lives of their families, and the seawall still hasn't been built, it hasn't even started. But once we get this seawall built, and we're going to break ground, if not at the end of this year, then certainly early next year, once it's built, we'll see people's flood insurance bills lowered. We'll put money back in people's pockets. Can you imagine that?
Is everyone money back in your pockets, anybody?
We're going to get this done. I assure you, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to carry the weight on this project.
Thank you, Congressman. It seems like every community meeting we have, no matter who's sitting in the chair, no matter where it is, we have a problem. We have an opiate problem in Staten Island. We have a drug problem in Staten Island. We hit record highs with overdoses and drug use and opiate use in Staten Island. And we know the local people, the police, and the local level government officials are helping. The borough president and the district attorney are doing some wonderful things. But on the federal level, we need some help too, Congressman.
Yeah.
We have to save our children, we have to save our community with this.
So there's been, both parties have completely left taken their eye off the ball when it comes to this. Both parties have failed you all. You know, we had companies like Purdue start 10, 15 years ago, flood our streets with OxyContin. We didn't do anything. Neither party did a thing. And so, what we see with this crisis, as well as with the crisis of skyrocketing healthcare costs, is we got to make sure to get these pharmaceutical companies out of Congress. We got to get them out of Congress because they're buying our politicians. Buying them all. That's why I'm proud that I'm not taking a cent from corporate PACs or federal lobbyists, because you all have to know whose side I'm on. That I'm not conflicted when I sit down with somebody, with a drug maker, or with any other type of special interest, that I'm only thinking about your interests. So companies like Purdue flood our streets with OxyContin, and we ain't make the long and arduous road of things like prescriber training and limiting the number of pills that people can prescribe. But now we have another crisis. We have the crisis of fentanyl-laced heroin, which is actually killing the majority of folks who are dying from overdoses. And what's even scarier than that is we have more and more people dying from fentanyl-laced heroin who never took a pill in the first place. They never even started with prescription pills. And so what we have to do, and what I believe Staten Island can be an unbelievable pilot for, is showing how America has the resources and the strategy to tackle the opioid epidemic. Now, the HOPE program is an unbelievable start to that. It's the NYPD partnering with the DA's office, partnering with local hospitals, partnering with community-based organizations to save people's lives, put them through recovery after they enter our criminal justice system, after they get arrested, or after they overdose. We need to see that program expanded, and we need to get the federal funding for it to expand, so that we are pushing people into services and into the care they need before they get arrested, before they overdose. We can dramatically reduce the number of people we are losing to this crisis. Last year, we lost more people to overdoses than in the entirety of the Vietnam War. Can you believe that? If there was a gang that killed 60,000 Americans, if there was a virus that killed 60,000 Americans, I assure you that the federal government would find billions upon billions of dollars to solve this problem. But somehow, because this is a silent killer that spreads throughout the country, somehow because of that, Congress can't get its act together. It can find the time and the resources to take care of the wealthiest amongst us. It can find the time and the resources to take care of companies that are paying an effective tax rate of 0, but it can't find the time and the resources to save our young people. We gotta fix that. Now, we've done it before. We did it with the HIV/AIDS crisis. We saw an unbelievable investment in education, an unbelievable investment in prevention, and an unbelievable investment in treatment. We got to do the same with this crisis. And lastly, we have to look at the fact that fentanyl is streaming into our country. And that involves us supporting law enforcement. We've got to support law enforcement at our ports of entry. We have to support law enforcement in screening with the Postal Service. And we certainly have to support all echelons of law enforcement to go after the drug traffickers that are selling fentanyl that is killing our kids. It's going to take everything, and we're going to get it done.
Immigrants are under assault in this nation. Our neighbors in Staten Island, our Hispanic community is in fear. ICE is in our courthouses. ICE is in places where it should not be. Scott Stringer published a report that New York City is the ICE capital of our country. What are you going to do, Congressman Rose, to help protect all of our neighbors and to help keep the American values of honoring and respecting immigrants? Thank you.
Are we doing one question after another? Or we do this one? Thank you for your question. It is undeniably true that for so many of us here in New York City, I'm a fourth-generation New Yorker. My great-grandparents came here from Eastern Europe, many of them, some of them fleeing anti-Semitism. For so many of us, our family stories are the stories of immigrants. That's the story of America. ICE has undeniably overstepped its bounds. There's no doubt. Today in America, in many, many cities, people are afraid to send their kids to school, afraid to go to the hospital, afraid to report crimes, afraid to report crimes that even are committed against themselves. I'm a strong proponent, as I know the NYPD is as well, of sanctuary cities. It's important for immigrants to know, irrespective of their status here in New York City, that they are safe when they report a crime. That they are safe when they report a crime. That they are safe when a crime is committed against them, that they go get the care that they need. They have to know that. And unfortunately, as a consequence of this administration's actions, they're not getting that message as well as they should be. They really aren't. So we have got to use every legislative tool available to us to make sure that ICE is focusing on what its basic mission is, what it was doing previous to when this administration came into power. We have got to do that, and I assure you that now that Congress will be exercising that necessary oversight. There's a role and function for ICE. I think we all understand what it is. But in many of the things that you're referencing, it is not that.
And without trying to open Pandora's box too wide, I'm just going to mention 3 letters. N-R-A. And guns. And the problem with guns in this country, and the availability of guns, and the effect of the lobby, the NRA lobby, on our politicians accepting funds from them. We can't get good, strong, federal gun control. We have it here in New York State, to most part, but not across the country.
You're 100% right. We have a public health crisis in this country of gun violence. You know why I know that? Watch this, kids. Do you do school safety drills now? Yep. It's unbelievable. Our own children are afraid to go to school because of the epidemic of gun violence. Our parents are afraid to send their kids to school, hugging their children tight each and every day when they leave home. It's a familiar story, right? We can't just solve this at the city level or the state level, because you hit the nail on the head. The NYPD is working our hearts out. We put in as many gun restrictions as possible. But what we find is that the vast majority of guns recovered from crimes in New York City originate from down south. Originate from out of state, right? This requires federal legislation. That's why I was honored to vote for universal background checks, HRA, the first piece of substantive gun legislation passed by Congress in close to a generation. But we can't stop there. How do you know that terrorists and drugs are streaming across this open border? Because believe you me that my sole and top priority is protecting your kids from fentanyl-laced heroin and protecting you all from terrorists. And she said, look, we have a model. We have a model that tells us that this is how it's happening. I said, well, what does the model show you? Well, she said, I don't have access to the model. What does the stats show you? I don't have access to the stats. I said, you came up to us, United States Congress, without being prepared? I assure you, study after study after study shows that fentanyl is coming into our country through ports of entry. Terrorists are coming to this country through our airports. Undocumented immigrants coming into our country, overstaying their travel visas, and coming through our asylum system. So I am not going to play politics with this issue. I voted for the compromise appropriation. Had some additional fencing in there, this and that. But if you think for a second that a wall, a $60, $75 billion wall that Mexico is going to pay for from sea to shining sea is going to solve these problems?
It's not going to solve the problems at all, for sure.
I don't think those are the right. I don't think those are the right investments for us to help.
There's no question.
I disagree that I don't think that these are the right investments to make with limited money. I treat taxpayer money as if it was my own money. I'm not going to play politics with this because I think that's probably what you want, right?
No, I personally just want to vote.
I disagree, but I respect your beliefs.
Oh my God, anytime I get the chance to talk to Staten Islanders, it's unbelievable. This is the greatest privilege I've ever had.
Yeah, what's the hardest part of the job so far? You're in there a couple
Oh, man,
months. What's the feeling like? this is a never-ending job. You know, whenever you're awake, you're working, but I love it. I love it. I'm blessed with the most amazing wife, most amazing family, best staff in America. So they make my life really easy. All right?
Yep, thanks.